Welcome to this lecture for Research Methods. We'll be talking today about experimental control and internal validity. So we'll talk about a couple of different types of validity in research studies before we focus on internal. We'll talk about experimental control in terms of controlling for extraneous variables as well as confound variables. Talk about construct validity of independent variables, and then wrap up with threats to internal validity. Okay, validity. What is it? Well, it's about truth or trust or confidence. Truth of what, trust in what, confidence in what depends, right? What are you talking about the validity of? If you're talking about the validity of a measurement or of a manipulation, so the validity of a dependent variable or an independent variable or a predictor or criterion variable, how well did you measure what you intended to measure? Did you manipulate what you intended to manipulate? The degree to which you did that is your construct validity. So the truth of you're measuring what you intend to measure and you're manipulating what you intend to manipulate, that's construct validity. Now, if you're talking about the truth of your findings or your conclusions, so you've measured things and then you've made some conclusions that there are differences or relationships of some sort. The degree to which those findings are valid, well, it can be a couple ways. One, there's statistical conclusion validity. So if you're using null hypothesis significance testing, typically when you run a study, you're going to measure variables, and you're going to conclude there's some statistically significant difference or a statistically significant relationship between or among variables, right? And the degree to which you can be confident that your decision, to reject the null hypothesis or fail to reject the null hypothesis, the degree to which you can be confident in that decision is your statistical conclusion validity, right? So how concerned are you that you might have made a type 1 or a type 2 error? We've talked before about things that can lead to those different types of error. And so the degree that you can eliminate all the things that lead to those types of errors, you'll have more statistical conclusion validity. If you have, for example, a really underpowered study, maybe small n, really heterogeneous groups, okay, you maybe increased odds of making a type 2 error, and let's say you fail to find a significant effect difference relationship. Well, at that point, you're going to go, well, yeah, but I may not have very good statistical conclusion validity because I had low power, right? Internal validity really only applies to when you're trying to make cause and effect inferences, right? Internal validity is the degree to which you can trust an observed cause and effect relationship is real. Excuse me. So it primarily applies to experiments. If you're doing a correlational study but trying to draw some causal inference from that, which is already some problems because correlational studies by design have limited internal validity. But if you're trying to make a cause and effect, explanation, okay, you've got some level of internal validity. There's different things that will affect that, which we'll talk a lot about today. And that's different from external validity, right? Which is the degree to which your findings, now that you've said that there is some difference, relationship, pattern, association, whatever you found in a study, the degree to which those findings can be expected to generalize beyond what was specifically done in that study at that time, right? So not just in terms of the sample, but in terms of what kind of questions they answered, what kind of manipulation did they experience, and what time of the year, in what country did this thing take place, okay? When we find this truth of some maybe cause and effect relationship or a correlational relationship, how far beyond exactly how we found it can that truth extend? And that's where external validity comes in. So you probably already figured out there's a bit of a hierarchy of validity here, right? And this is, there's obviously some overlap here, but to some degree you can't have one type without the other. And we start with, at the base, construct validity. If you don't have construct validity, right? If you didn't measure what you intended to measure, well then all the truth of your conclusions, it doesn't matter. Because in your method, when you were measuring something or you're manipulating something, you're not really sure if you did it right. Well, then you don't know if what you found is going to be true in terms of cause and effect, or if it's going to be if you're going to extend that truth beyond the study, because you don't even know if you found what you think you found, because you're not sure if you measured what you thought you measured, right? So you have to, at the base, have construct validity. And let's say you have pretty good construct validity. Okay, now let's run our analyses, and we'll see, do we have, what's our statistical conclusion validity, right? Did we have sufficient power? Did we do things like data mining or p-hacking, where we're at really increased odds of a type 1 error, where we ran, 30 tests all at alpha 0.05. Oh, and you found one thing that's significant. Yep, I'm really confident this is significant. No, you're not. It's probably not really significant if you're doing something like that, right? And if you're doing that, something shady there, and you have poor statistical conclusion validity, there's no point going forward and think, well, is this really a good cause and effect relationship, or can this apply beyond here? Because it very well may not be real at all, whatever it is. Right? But if we have good construct validity, we have good statistical conclusion validity, well, now, if we're interested in cause and effect relationships, we can start looking at internal validity. Okay, we found this difference. It's statistically significant. We did manipulate what we tried to manipulate. We did measure what we tried to measure. Now, is there any other reason, any other thing that could explain the pattern we found other than that A caused B, right? If not, then we've got really good internal validity, right? And if we have that, then we say, okay, we found this. We're confident that it's true. Now we can go out and say, how far can this extend? How generalizable is this finding? Right? But again, no point talking about external validity if you don't have any internal validity for cause and effect relationships. Okay. One of the hallmarks of experimental research is experimental control. And as we'll see, this is important for multiple aspects of validity. So when you exert experimental control in conducting a study, what you're doing is trying to eliminate the effects on the dependent variable of any variable other than the effect of the independent variable, right? So the only thing that you want impacting your measurement of the dependent variable is what you do to them. Otherwise, scores should just be flat, nothing should happen to them. Right? Now, there are a couple of things, and two really types of variables that will impact the dependent variable, possibly, other than the IV. One group of them would be extraneous variables. These are sometimes referred to as nuisance variables, right? So these are random or non-systematic error, noise in the data, if you will. It can come from things like pre-existing individual differences, or possibly also differences in how participants are treated during the study. But again, they're non-systematic. So there's some people are higher than others on the dependent variable. Okay, cool, that's fine. As long as in an experiment, people that are high and low, those differences exist at all levels of the independent variable, right? You don't just have all the really high scoring people in one group and really low scoring people in another group, right? If you have that, well, there's a systematic error. It needs to be unsystematic, random, right? And so, excuse me, it's not going to make you think there's a difference when there's not a difference, but it's going to cloud your ability to see a difference, right? So because that it primarily impacts your statistical conclusion validity, and in particular, all that error, all that noise makes it hard to find if there really is an effect that may be there, making it more likely, obviously, for a type 2 error, right? So they are problematic, but maybe not the worst thing in the world. More concerning to a lot of researchers are confounding variables, or confounds for short. And this is systematic error, where this is a variable that affects the dependent variable, and the differences in the DV are related to the level of the independent variable received, right? So, some people got the drug, some people didn't, and now we have these two groups. Now, if those two groups differ along some other variable, they differ in some other way, well, that's a confound variable, right? Because we want the groups to differ only in terms of what we did to them. If they differ in some other way, that's a confound, where that variable it's confounded, it's mixed up with the independent variable. So now, if we find a difference, we don't know, is it because of what we did, or because this other systematic difference between groups that we didn't intend to be there. So it's going to impact statistical conclusion validity in terms of type 1 error, and also it's going to pretty directly impact internal validity, right? It's going to severely limit your ability to draw causal inferences about, well, what caused the difference if the groups differed in more than one way. However, it's all about plausibility, right? Plausibility of an alternative explanation. Right? So these two groups differ based on the independent variable. Oh crap, they also differ this other way. Well, could that other difference explain the difference in the DV? Is that plausible? If so, that's a big problem. If not, not as much a problem. Right? So if you're doing a study looking at cognitive behavioral therapy versus Gestalt therapy, right? And let's say all your CBT therapists, you get a bunch of new graduates that are, 0 to 2 years of experience, and your Gestalt therapist, well, they haven't been a new Gestalt therapist maybe in a while, and so all the people, the therapists working in treating people in that group, all have more than 15 years of experience. Okay, and now you find group differences. Oh, these clients that were receiving Gestalt therapy had better outcomes. Okay, well, we've got a problematic confound, right? Because those two groups differed not just in what type of therapy they got, but in how experienced the therapist was. And there is evidence suggesting to some degree that level of experience with therapists can have an impact on client outcomes, right? So now there's this plausible alternative explanation for difference. So that's a problematic outcome, a problematic confound. So rewind, think if we did that same study, we got our CBT, our Gestalt therapists, and they've got equal levels of experience, but it just so happened, weird, all the CBT therapists wore blue shirts, blue tops when counseling, and all the Gestalt therapists, they wore white tops, white shirts when counseling. Systematic difference. Now, if one group gets better, it could be because of the shirts. Probably not, right? That's not really a plausible alternative explanation. So although that may be a confound, it's not as concerning a confound. So if there's a systematic difference, okay, that could be bad, but would that systematic difference be expected to affect the dependent variable? If so, okay, then now that's a significant problem, and a big threat, the major threat to internal validity. So obviously we want to exert some experimental control, particularly for that first set of variables, extraneous variables, those individual differences, right, that are going to cloud our picture, make it hard to see effects, hard to see relationships that are there. One way to do that would be to recruit homogeneous samples or recruit from homogeneous populations. And you do that with your inclusion-exclusion criteria, right? So I'm doing this study, excuse me, treatment study of CBT versus Gestalt, looking at maybe people with depression. And, well, yeah, but some people may be in there, they may have depression comorbid with anxiety, maybe comorbid with a substance abuse disorder or personality disorder. I'm going to screen all those out. I want people that only have depression, no history of any other disorder, no history of a manic episode or hypomanic episode. Okay, I want people that are all the same, as similar as possible, right? And doing that, now it's going to be easier to see if there's a difference between these two groups. One gets CBT, one gets Gestalt. It's going to be easier to see that now that I've weeded out all those people that have these other random disorders that may influence their outcome, right? And it won't make one group do better than the other, but it'll just make it harder to see effects if some people have, varying levels of severity, what have you. So making people the same as possible on anything that might impact your dependent variable via your inclusion-exclusion criteria, that can get you a homogeneous sample, but they're all very similar. And that can substantially increase your power, make it easier to detect a significant effect, easier to detect a significant relationship. Trade-off, what's the impact on external validity, right? Obviously, my findings for this study apply to people that have only depression and no other disorders, but we know that, well, that may be a problem because a lot of the people diagnosed with depression also have a comorbid disorder. So it may limit the utility of my findings, right? If it limits the external validity to that degree. Another approach is to use a pre-post research design, right? Where you still have treatment group and a control group, but you're going to measure both groups pre and both groups post. So it's kind of a before and after design. And when you do this, each person serves as their own control. So within treatment levels, you're going to compare each person to his or her score pre to post, right? So you're not looking at, from pre to post, you're not looking at the pre-group to the post-group. You're looking at each person pre to post, how did they change? So then if somebody happens to be, I've got somebody high and somebody low in this group, that's fine. That high person their pre-score is going to be compared to their post-score. It's going to be high to slightly higher, and the low person, they're going to be low compared to slightly higher than low, right? And that's going to be deal with that problem of that error variance to some degree. But as we talked about before, whenever you have a repeated measures design, like a within subject design we've talked about previously, there's the possibility of testing effects, right? Where repeatedly measuring the dependent variable, well, there can be some problems: practice effects, fatigue effects, sensitization effects. Right? Now, testing effects in this context are worse if they impact one level of the IV differently than another, right? So there's a confound. Right? So in our example of this study, CBT versus Gestalt therapy, if our dependent variable is a measure of distorted thoughts, right? And we're asking most people's distorted thoughts before therapy and after therapy, right? There may be some sensitization effect there, right? Okay, where you're asking about distorted thoughts, and then when you ask me about them again later, I'm going to expect you're going to want a different answer, right? But that expectation is going to be heightened for people that experienced CBT than those that experienced Gestalt, because you're going to talk a lot about distorted thinking in a CBT therapy session, right? So that pre to post that design is going to affect one group more than the other, right? So you may get this exaggerated effect because of sensitization, right? So that testing effect is confounded with type of therapy in that example, and that's a worst case. An alternative would be use a match groups design. So with a match group design, instead of doing pre-post, you just do your two groups. You have your CBT group and your Gestalt group, but then instead of comparing someone to themselves pre-post, you are going to compare individuals in pairs, somebody in CBT compared to somebody else in Gestalt, and those somebody's not just be two random people that are matched where they are very similar on some important variable or some important variables. Right? Most frequently, it'd be your initial level of severity or level of impairment. Right? You want your two kind of worst people. Okay, I'm going to see the worst person who's struggling the most in the CBT group, the person that's struggling the most in the Gestalt group. I'm going to compare both of you to each other after therapy, right? And then the two people that are struggling the least, I'm going to compare you two after therapy, right? And you keep matching people. And the more variables you can use to match people on, the more effective this will be. It does get fairly complicated, just the mathematics of matching people on multiple variables. But it can be important, particularly if you have a small sample size, which you often do in treatment studies, right? If you're doing, again, comparing two groups or two therapy modules, you may end up with 10, 15 subjects. Maybe only 6 in each condition. It's going to be pretty low powered. Using a matched groups design can get some of that power back by not using between subjects analyses, but doing within subjects analyses. Another thing you can do to control extraneous variables, which also helps control confound variables, is standardization of conditions. So this is good for both types, extraneous and confound variables, where you're treating people as similarly as possible. And when you're trying to control extraneous variables, you're trying to treat everybody the same, right? Your focus. Everybody, treat everybody the same. To prevent confounds, yeah, you want to treat everybody the same, but your main focus in trying to prevent confounds with standardization of conditions is you want to make sure that you treat people that get one level of independent variable the exact same as somebody who gets the other level of independent variable. That those people in different groups are treated the same, except for the one thing you're trying to manipulate, the IV, right? And so to do that, you might use an experimental script, right? Where that way you make sure you're saying the same things over and over to people. If you're doing kind of a live laboratory type study. Frequently, these days, a lot of studies are a little more automated, and the scripts will be written, or they'll be played in video or audio, which is really helpful for standardization. but some drawbacks, right? Because if you've got this script that has these, okay, when you see the red dot, click the button. When you click the button, you'll hear a noise. When you hear a noise, make a rating, and you just kind of assume people are going to do it right. Whereas if you're doing it kind of old school in the lab, you see that glazed over look in the face, and you okay, I'm going to repeat the directions one more time. Right? And so you can check for confusion, misunderstandings. So probably best to do kind of a mix if you can. Right? We'll have it as automated as possible, so as standardized as possible, but then leave in that human element where you can check in with subjects. Are there any questions? But then you need to have standardized responses for if whatever questions come up. Right? And if they ask a question that's so off the wall you don't have a standardized response, you just need to make note of that, and you might have to report it later if it seems like it's relevant to analysis. Okay, we've talked before about construct validity of the dependent variable or predictor criterion variables, but it's also important to think about the construct validity of the independent variable. So are you manipulating what you intend to manipulate? And that has some implications for various types of validity, particularly internal validity and statistical conclusion validity. So we're talking about the construct validity of the IV. Did we impact participants' experience of some target construct, right? The thing we're trying to manipulate. So we're trying to, okay, what happens when people get angry? We're trying to make people angry. So did we do that? But not only did we really make people angry, but did we also not make them something else, right? So we impact what we tried to impact, but not other constructs. So what if our manipulation made people angry? Yeah, we made them angry, but we also made them scared. Well, if we also made them scared, right? So I have two groups, angry group, not angry group. And if my manipulation made them scared and angry, well, crap. Now my groups differ in more than one way, right? They are also differ based on how one's scared and one's not scared. And that's a confound, right? When there's a confound, that's a significant threat to internal validity. So now I don't know why the groups differ on the dependent variable. Is it because they differed in how angry they were? Or is it because they differed in how scared they were? Don't know. So I want a pure manipulation if possible. So when trying to make sure that I'm impacting that target construct, so make sure that I'm making them angry, one thing I want to think about is literally the level of impact. Am I doing enough to make them a measurable amount of angry? Right? So is my manipulation kind of weak where I go, yeah, I don't like your face. That may not make them angry enough for what you're trying to see, right? Oh, when people are angry, they have a harder time remembering certain things. Okay, well, you may not find that effect if you didn't really make them angry enough, right? So especially when you're first looking at a research question, first looking at an independent variable, you want to use pretty extreme within ethical, practical limits manipulation to make sure that, yep, I want to make sure I get them good and angry so I can see the difference between angry and not angry, right? I don't want to go too short. Well, they weren't angry enough for it to have an effect. Maybe if I done a little more, right? I can always scale back in the next study if I find something. But if I make them as angry as possible and I find nothing, well, okay, I'll stop there. Whereas if I made them a little angry and found nothing, well, go back and make them angrier. Still nothing. Make them angrier. Still nothing, right? I got to keep going until I find it. So better to start more on the high end. Relatively, right? We don't want to go so far that it's, well, it would make no sense to make somebody that angry. Nobody ever gets that angry, right? That's those studies where they say, if you drink, 7,000 sodas a day, you'll get cancer. Well, nobody's going to drink 7,000 sodas a day. That may be too big a manipulation, too big of an impact you're shooting for. So scale it back some. The other thing to think about to make sure that you are manipulating that target construct is the degree to which you create a sense of experimental realism, right? And that's, are you making it seem like this is a real and relevant issue, right? Because you won't have an impact with your independent variable if participants aren't taking the study seriously or if they don't have any investment in what they're doing. So you've got to find a way to make it relevant to them, right? That's why a lot of the things in social psychology, whenever they're doing things where they're trying to manipulate information processing, they'll have some scenario. It could be any scenario in the world, but they often make it something like, when they're working with college students, they'll say, your university is thinking about increasing tuition, right? Okay, all of a sudden, participants have buy-in. What's going on with this? And it's important to them, and they're going to pay attention to what's being said, what they're reading, right? So you want to make it relevant to the individuals, so they'll take it seriously. Otherwise, your IV probably won't have much of an impact. The other thing you do is check to see if you had an impact, and you can do that with a manipulation check. Right? And a manipulation check is just a question or a measure you put in somewhere to see if you in fact did effectively manipulate the independent variable. Right? So let's say I'm trying to make people angry, and I want to see if that affects their memory for certain words. Right? My dependent variable is number of words, and my manipulation check isn't, okay, well, did people remember a different number of words depending if they're angry or not? No. That's my study. My manipulation check is if I ask them, hey, how angry were you? Right? I'm not asking about the DV. I'm asking about the IV, what I did. Did it work? So if I'm showing people different pictures of, different types of, I think people see farm animals versus domesticated animals, that causes different thought patterns. I may ask, what kind of animal did you see right before you saw the words on the screen, right? To see if they even noticed what I was trying to show them to manipulate how they were feeling. So you can work in a manipulation check into the study, typically after you have your measure of the dependent variable, right? Because you don't want to, otherwise you're not sure about the impact of that question on their scores in the DV, so it comes kind of at the tail end. And then if you want to check and see, again, not just, okay, did I hit what I was trying to hit with my manipulation? Did I have any collateral damage? Did I accidentally manipulate something else? So you want to make sure you didn't manipulate other constructs, and with that you can do a confound check. So if I'm trying to make people angry, I'm like, wow, I might make them scared too. How am I going to know? Well, I'll ask them how scared they are, right? And that would be your confound check. So you measure, kind of like doing a manipulation check for something you didn't intend to manipulate, where I'm hoping that the two groups will be equally scared, right? The ones I tried to make angry, the ones I didn't try to make angry, equally scared. If I didn't really impact fear, there should be no difference, right? I want non-statistical significance there, right? I can look for that with a confound check. And if I find it, okay, now maybe I got to go back and redesign my study and come up with a different way to manipulate people's anger that doesn't make them also frightened. Okay, so you can do those checks, manipulation checks and confound checks in the study, again, kind of after you've measured the DV. You can also do them as part of pilot testing, right? Pilot testing is whenever you run kind of a small pre-study study before the big study. And this is a good idea, especially if you've got a study that's going to be time-consuming, expensive, a lot of effort. You want to make sure you do it right. Put your best effort forward. So you do pilot tests, maybe multiple pilot tests, where you just get a couple of people to run through the study, and you do your confound checks, manipulation checks, and you'll even do an interview after the end. Okay, hey, was anything weird in the study? Any questions confusing? When I did this, did you notice the picture of the person in the background? Right? Anything you want to ask them to see what people's experience is going to be like when they encounter your experimental materials. Right? And sometimes, if you're worried about if you have lots of questions, you're worried about participant fatigue, you may end up, if you do sufficient pilot testing, you may not have your manipulation checks and your confound checks in your actual study. You'll just do them in pilot testing until they're gone. Okay, look, we've these small groups. I figured out here's a good manipulation. I really am manipulating what I'm trying to. I'm not manipulating other things. Let's go for it. And then I'm not going to check in my real study because I checked enough during pilot testing, right? And you could do both too if you have the time and resources to do that. Okay. Lastly, threats to internal validity in an experiment, right? Again, obviously, there's more threats to internal validity, threats that apply to correlation studies, threats, as we'll talk a bit later, that apply to quasi-experimental studies. But for an experiment, when you've got, at least two groups, a couple of threats, one being non-random assignment, right? So if you don't randomly assign people to the level of the IV, well, that's a pretty big threat to internal validity. You might have selection bias. So if I have a smoking cessation study, right? And I advertise, hey, smoke cessation study, come be in my study where either you're going to get my program, my intense 3-8 program where you'll quit smoking, or you'll be in a control group. All participants will receive $50, Dave and Buster's. Cool. Pick which group you want to be in. Well, you want to respect people's autonomy, let them make choices. That's nice. But no, because what's going to happen if you let them choose if they want to be in the experimental group or the control group? Hey, guess what? My treatment works. Well, yeah, it works. Everybody who wants to quit got in your treatment group. Everybody who doesn't want to quit, I'll sign up for the control group and take my $50 gift card to Dave & Buster's. Thanks much, right? So you don't let people select into the young groups. You don't use existing groups. You use random assignment to try to make them as equivalent as possible. And if you have reason to suspect they're not equivalent, okay, then we got problems. Related to that, sometimes we can end up with a non-equivalent control group after they've been selected in, based on what we do to them, right? In terms of the manipulation. I'm thinking specifically here about expectancy / placebo effects, right? So if you're in this study, and it's okay, you're going to be in a study, we're looking at the effects of substances on memory. Okay, so here you go, take this pill and then take this test. Okay, just take this test. Okay, if I take the pill, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm in the group that got a pill, my memory should do something, and now I'm going to try harder, or I'll try less hard, depending on which way I think the effect of the thing's supposed to be. And if I just say, take the test, oh, clearly I'm not getting the pill. Okay, I'm not going to try that hard, or I'll try real hard. Again, depending on what I think is happening. The point being, if we have these two groups, and not only are they treated differently in terms of, oh, one got the drug, one didn't get the drug, well, one is going to be influenced more by placebo effects because they know they're getting a drug. The other group knows they're not getting a drug, right? So to deal with that, we give them both a pill, because one has active ingredients and the other doesn't, right? That way they'll both have a placebo effect. So both of them, if they think the drug is going to help them, will do a little better. But whichever one has the active ingredient, they'll do even better, theoretically. But as much as possible, you want to design your study such that participants are blind to which condition they're in, to where they don't know if they're in the experimental group or if they're in the control group. Because again, that can affect the performance of the dependent variable. Because again, they're going to try to please you, and if they're in the experimental group, they're going to try to do well, whatever they think that means. If they're in the control group, they're going to try to do not so well, whatever they think that means. For therapy studies, it can be hard to come up with a control group like where you have a placebo, right? Okay, you're getting therapy and you're getting inactive therapy, which they used to do that way. Oh, we'll just have these people talk to someone who's not doing our manualized treatment. They're just going to listen attentively and be supportive. Hey, guess what? People in that group got better, because that's a lot of what therapy is, right? So it wasn't really an inactive treatment. So to deal with that, one common approach to that for therapy studies, because you can't really have a fake treatment, placebo, is to have a waitlist control. So when it's time for the study, okay, you're going to have people that are immediately going to start, other people that are going to start in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on how long the study runs. That way you can compare people at the same time, right? Just in case something happens nationally where everybody gets depressed. Okay, well, that's going to affect the two groups equally if you're measuring at the same time. So that's one way that can be helpful to deal with it, but it's got its own drawbacks, right? And it's pretty good for internal validity, but the impact of a waitlist control group is really about external validity. Right? So if I hear about an experimental study, hey, with this treatment for depression, you want to sign up? If I'm severely depressed, yeah, I need help, please. And then you say, okay, so you're going to be randomly assigned to either the treatment group or the waitlist group. Well, we'll see you in 6 weeks. Yeah, I'm out. I'm not going to be in that study. Right? So people are going to self-select out of the study if they know that they're going to be randomly assigned and they can't be guaranteed to get the treatment now. Well, then those folks are unlikely to participate in the study, which means your findings may be limited to people who are okay with waiting, which may be people who have more moderate distress. Another thing that can affect internal validity of an experiment are demand characteristics, which we've kind of already alluded to. This is just anything in the study that gives hints to what the hypothesis is, or leads people to believe they know what the hypothesis is, and then causes them to act in accordance with that to try to help you, because people are nice. So to deal with demand characteristics, people from trying to, oh, you study from memory? Okay, I'm going to remember lots of stuff. Or, oh, you're trying to, it's clearly supposed to be about bad memory. No, I don't remember anything, right? To address that, oftentimes you end up with having to use a cover story, right? With some level of deception, possibly. We're looking at a study of blah, 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 which maybe we're adjacent to that topic. We're not telling you exactly what we're studying because we don't want you to try to help us so much. But again, the degree to which you use deception, it has to be justified and justifiable based on how important it is to find what you're trying to find and how disruptive the deception is anticipated to be for people. And then you also have to do a full debrief afterward and tell them, hey, sorry we lied to you. Here's why. Here's what was really going on. Thank you so much. Don't tell your friends. Right? Another approach is the unrelated experiments technique. Right? This is where you really have one study, but you make it sound like two. Right? So in the first study, you manipulate your independent variable, and you're going to measure something you don't really care about, right? So I'm going to, again, make people angry, and then I'm going to say, okay, tell me how you feel about your mother. And they're going to think, oh, yeah, you're going to see if I say bad things about my mom when I'm angry. I got you. And then they're going to do whatever they do. But again, I don't care what they say about their mom. I was just, okay, study one's done. Okay, now study two, we're going to have you eat this carrot and then see how many words you can remember, right? Another thing, okay, oh, yeah, carrot's memory, got it. But no, it's all about if you were angry or not. So I made you angry here. Immediately I'm going into this thing where I'm measuring your memory, but now you don't connect the two, and so you're less likely to try to influence the variables that way, right? And I'm going to have maybe everybody eat carrots, so everybody's going to try to remember hard or not remember, whatever it is. Generally, also, it's good to use, if you really are worried about demand characteristics, to use non-reactive measures. And we've talked before about those being physiological measures or indirect measures. If you want to look at, how couples feel about each other after some intervention, you don't ask them, how do you feel about each other? You see how close do they sit together on a couch, right? So it's an indirect, a non-reactive measure where they probably aren't expecting you to be looking at that part of their behavior. And so they're not going to be faking good or faking bad to try to help you or hurt you. Also using non-reactive manipulation, so using more subtle manipulations of your independent variable. Again, sometimes this involves using that cover story, where I'm going to show you pictures of different people, and I may be manipulating, I may showing you, oh, there's some white people and some African American people, and you think, oh, this is about race, and it's not, right? It's about age, and I've just mixed in people of different ethnic groups to throw you off. But really, I've counterbalanced this in such a way that really I'm showing this group all older adults, this group all younger adults, and I don't care about the ethnic differences, right? That way, you don't know that I'm trying to manipulate the thing, but hopefully, it's still having the effect if I think it does have an effect. Experimenter bias is another one. So experimenters, not intentionally, but even unintentionally, unconsciously perhaps, will nudge results in a certain direction when they know the hypothesis and who's in what group. So to deal with that, two things you can do. One, you could have naive experimenters. The people conducting the experiment be naive where they don't know the hypothesis, which typically this is if you have a larger lab, you've got your researchers and you've hired some lab assistants who say, hey, okay, go collect this data. What's it about? Don't worry about it. Okay, it's those big universities are super rich. They can do that. Most of us can't afford that kind of personnel. But that's probably the best way to eliminate experiment bias. If people don't even know what the study's about, they just know, I don't know, man, just watch the film and ask these questions. Just do it, please. Thank you. I'm getting $5 an hour here. Most of us don't do that. So what we end up trying to do is at least have the experiment be blind to which condition people are in, right? So in this case, a lot of research is done collaboratively. So you have at least two people. So if one person knows what condition people are in. That person isn't in the room. The other experimenter will be in the room with them, collecting the data on the dependent variable, and they won't know who got the drug, who didn't get the drug, right? So when both the participants are blind to what condition they're in, and the experimenter is blind to what condition they're in, well, that's a double-blind study, right? And that's dealing with both those experimental bias and those subject effects with those subjects trying to help you out. Okay, so take home. In terms of experimental control and validity, in particular internal validity, there's lots of places things can go wrong, right? Lots of places you kind of screw up and jeopardize the internal validity of your study, the statistical conclusion validity, and even the external validity. But validity is a matter of degree, right? So it's not an all or none thing. Mostly. I mean, if you've got a really bad confound in there, then yeah, you could really shoot yourself in the foot and be, well, crap. We found this big difference. It's huge. But now we don't know what it means because we have these groups differ in two ways, and either way could have been why we see the change in the DV. But usually that doesn't happen. Usually it's more subtle. Well, it could be a little bit of this, might be a little bit of this. And that's okay. You just kind of got to use logic and some statistics to try to figure that out and tease that apart. And then, of course, you're not trying to solve everything with one study. You go back and do another study. And that's the way the confidence in truth, the validity, grows as findings aggregate, as they come together with the same pattern over and over again. Okay, yeah, now we do think this is a cause and effect relationship, right? But again, as we're focusing on internal validity, if we plug all the holes in the internal validity boat, right? So we do everything we can to make sure we are maxed out in internal validity, which again, we said we need that before we do external. But if we go super far with all kinds of experimental control, we've got this homogeneous group where we've cloned people to be the exact same person in our two different groups. They're treated the exact same way with this robot interacting with them to give them the directions. Super standardized. Okay. Well, now they're going to be sailing in a very small external validity pond, right? So we'll be super confident that, yes, in this study we found this cause and effect relationship. Cool. Does that apply to like real life? I don't know. Are there robots in real life doing the therapy? Okay, well, if not, maybe not. Right? And that's the trade-off. That's the balance. But which again, my bias is you've got to have at least good enough internal validity first. Otherwise, there's no point trying to generalize questionable findings. But you probably can go too far and sacrifice all your external validity for perfect internal validity. So find that balance. That's all for now. Take care.